You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcast on the reform of the European Globalisation Adjustment Fund.
Hardening economic trends call for policy changes, so the European Commission has decided it's time for a reset of the European Globalisation Adjustment Fund.
The idea is to broaden the scope of the fund to cover structural changes that go beyond globalisation, such as the consequences of digitalisation and moving to a low-carbon economy, and to introduce changes to mobilise the fund's resources more quickly. Stay with us.
Conventional wisdom holds that trade liberalisation leads to overall benefits for the economy via the reallocation of resources away from inefficient firms and industries, as well as benefits to consumers in terms of access to cheaper and more varied goods. However, this reallocation can lead to some companies losing their markets and workers their jobs.
The recognition that trade adjustments prompted by globalisation might hurt some workers led the European Union to set up a special fund to support their reintegration into the labour market.
So since 2006, the European Globalisation Adjustment Fund has been providing support to people losing their jobs as a result of major structural changes in world trade patterns due to globalisation. For example, when a large company shuts down or production is moved outside the EU.
In 2009, it was modified to cover major structural changes triggered by the global economic and financial crisis. As an emergency fund, it has remained outside the ceiling of the EU's multi-annual budget, and so it is mobilised on an ad hoc basis.
With a maximum annual budget of €150 million for the period 2014 to 2020, the Globalisation Fund can finance up to 60% of the cost of projects designed to help workers made redundant find another job or set up their own business. The remaining share has to be covered by member states.
As a general rule, it can be used only where at least 500 workers are made redundant by a single company, including the ceasing of suppliers' activities and of self-employed persons working for that firm, or if more than 500 workers are laid off in a particular sector in one or more neighbouring regions. So what kind of support does it offer for these workers?
Mainly, it offers them help with looking for a new job, careers advice and professional coaching, education and retraining, or in creating a new business. It can also provide training allowances, mobility and relocation allowances and similar support, but it does not co-finance special protection measures such as pensions or unemployment benefit, which are the responsibility of the EU member states.
So how effective has it been? Let's take a look.
Well, having analysed its functioning and in order to guide future discussions, the Commission brought in some data. From 2007 to 2016, it received 147 applications from 20 member states, targeting over 137,000 workers. Re-employment rates were at almost 50% on average, which means that 1 in 2 workers who got help managed to find another job.
A comprehensive analysis also revealed that the EU's Globalisation Adjustment Fund has been used rather unevenly by different EU member states, with some countries using most of the resources and others not at all.
Support was also found to have concentrated on certain sectors. One of the main problems seemed to be the eligibility criteria, which tended to leave SMEs out, and the short duration of the support programmes, which was challenging for workers seeking to enrol in higher education programmes.
For one national authority, the project supported by the fund ended up costing more than their regular national measures, and another member state called to include dismissals linked to digital and automation changes in the scope of the fund.
So, it was time to reset the terms and conditions of the fund.
Yes, it was. So in May 2018, the Commission presented a proposal to reform the fund while maintaining it as a special instrument outside the multi-annual budget. Now let's look at the modifications suggested.
Well, in general, the modifications concern the eligibility criteria, the co-financing rules and the mobilisation procedure, but perhaps the main change is that its objective will be broadened to offer assistance beyond globalisation-related challenges and financial or economic crisis to include the transition to a low-carbon economy and the consequences of digitalisation and automation.
Concerning the eligibility criteria, the threshold of redundancies would be lowered to more than 250 workers, while at the same time maintaining the exception for smaller labour markets.
As for the co-financing rate, this would be aligned with the highest European Social Fund co-financing rate attributed to the respective member state.
The proposal suggests modifying the procedure to cut red tape and make it faster, and the maximum amount that the fund can use has also been increased to €225 million per year compared to the €170 million per year set for the current financial framework.
So how have the proposed changes been received by stakeholders and other European institutions?
Well, member states' parliaments seem to be divided along the same fault lines which divide their countries over the usage of the fund, with parliaments such as Ireland, Lithuania, Malta and Portugal finding the proposal complies with the subsidiarity and proportionality principles. Others, such as Poland, warn it could lead to a greater financial burden and make clear their preference not to treat it as a separate financial instrument. And the Swedish Parliament found the proposal does conflict with the subsidiarity principle, arguing that helping such workers is a national competence.
As for stakeholders, trade unions have welcomed the broadening of the fund's scope to cover structural trends such as digitalisation, decarbonisation and automation. However, they would like to transform it into a sort of transition fund, and they would like close coordination with the European Social Fund for the sake of ensuring coherence.
The OECD suggests expanding national labour market programmes to assist displaced workers, rather than expanding the European Globalisation Fund to make it the major source of assistance, but also argues in favour of integrating the fund fully in the EU's multi-annual budget to make it more effective and broadening its scope to cover workers displaced by automation. So what are the next steps?
Well, at the level of the European Parliament, several committees will issue opinions on the matter, and the draft report prepared by the Employment Committee's rapporteur makes several suggestions, including to change the fund's name to European Transition Support Fund to reflect its wider scope, to reintroduce the possibility to include persons neither in employment nor in education in the activities financed by the fund, to set a single co-financing rate at 70%, and to be able to use the fund to support socio-economic redeployment in depressed areas with serious unemployment problems.
Now we'll have to wait and see how many of these recommendations survive the political negotiations and what position member states adopt in the end.
You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.